Sometimes I do get a little impatient when I don't have the privacy that I think I deserve or want at that particular time, but
He was the man in black, the outlaw poet of country, gospel, and rock. But behind that steely voice and calm demeanor, Johnny Cash carried a storm of bitterness toward those he saw as frauds, traitors, or reminders of pain. His life was marked by addiction, love, loss, and fierce grudges that simmered for decades. First on that list was Bob Dylan, a name whispered, not shouted. They weren't just musicians, they were prophets in the same storm, writing songs that bled from the same wound. Johnny had opened his arms to Dylan in Nashville, guided him into the hallowed halls of country royalty, carved a space for him in a world that didn't always welcome outsiders. But as Dylan turned inward, enigmatic, cold, untouchable, Johnny watched the bond unravel. He wasn't met with gratitude, he was met with distance, not anger, not betrayal in the loud sense, but silence, the kind that screams. To Johnny, that silence was a knife wrapped in velvet. He had stood for Dylan when it counted, and in return he became invisible. In letters never sent, Johnny wrote not of hate, but of heartbreak. Of a friend who forgot the fire that warmed him. Dylan didn't attack him, he erased him. And for Johnny Cash, a man who worshipped loyalty like scripture, that quiet dismissal was louder than any betrayal. Then came Elvis Presley. They rose together like twin titans of the South, two sons of Sun Records, two prophets in black, singing the ache of a generation. But where Johnny clawed his way through the mud of his sins toward redemption, Elvis let himself drown in velvet. To Johnny, Elvis was a cautionary ghost long before he died. He watched the king swap grit for glitter, hymns for headlines. Johnny never envied the fame, he feared it. And in Elvis, he saw what happened when a man lost the thread of his truth, when every note became a performance and every smile a mask. Behind closed doors, Johnny raged, not at Elvis, but at what had become of him. He hated the handlers, the hangers-on, the plastic palace that turned a raw, beautiful soul into a hollow icon. When Elvis's people began treating him like royalty and everyone else like court jesters, Johnny couldn't hide his fury. He didn't want to bow, he wanted to scream. What stung most was that Johnny still loved him, or at least the boy from Tupelo who used to sing like salvation. But by the time the pills took hold and the jumpsuits got heavier, Johnny saw only tragedy and felt only betrayal. He never called him an enemy, but in his eyes Elvis had committed the ultimate sin, not dying young, but dying forgotten by the man he once was, and that left Johnny bitter, mourning not a rival, but a fallen brother who'd never find his way back.
Yeah, it was not a very Merry Christmas for me. That was when I was getting pneumonia, and that was the rough part. The surgery went fine.
Then came Jerry Lee Lewis, a friend turned rival, then a bitter memory. Cash respected fire, he even lived in it. But Jerry Lee was a wildfire with no boundaries, destructive, erratic, and hungry for attention. He didn't just play wild, he embodied chaos. Where Johnny channeled pain into redemption, Jerry Lee hurled his demons at the world and dared it to flinch. They clashed on everything, audiences, women, even the very idea of God. During one drunk tirade backstage, Jerry mocked Johnny's gospel years, laughing that his newfound faith was just a career stunt. Johnny didn't respond with fists, but the silence that followed was volcanic. It wasn't just an insult. It was a tear in something sacred, and the rift widened. Jerry once showed up to a concert so intoxicated that he trashed an entire dressing room, then pointed fingers at Johnny's crew to escape blame. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was betrayal. Cash stormed out, furious and humiliated, and from that day forward, erased Jerry from his world. He never spoke his name again. Not in interviews, not in memoirs, not even to old friends. Because to Johnny, Jerry Lee wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was proof that talent without truth was a curse. and for a man who believed redemption had to be earned, Jerry's recklessness was a wound that never stopped bleeding. Waylon Jennings was a different story. Brotherhood turned cold. They were highwaymen, bandmates, rebels. They had laughed in the face of Nashville's rules, toured like renegades, and shared stories soaked in whiskey and blood. But pride, like an ember in dry grass, can burn even the strongest bridges. Waylon watched Johnny walk the narrow path of sobriety and salvation and couldn't stomach it. "You're not one of us anymore," he reportedly sneered as Johnny traded backstage brawls for Bible verses. What Waylon saw as betrayal, Johnny saw as survival. But neither would bend. It wasn't hate at first. It was heartbreak. Johnny still cared, still wished Waylon would understand. But when Waylon publicly mocked Johnny's prison concerts, calling them redemption theater, it struck a nerve too deep. That wasn't just ridicule. It was a stab to the soul. Johnny saw in Waylon the man he used to be, reckless, defiant, crumbling inside. But instead of empathy, Waylon threw stones. And so, the warmth of brotherhood turned to Cold War. They stood on stage, yes, but not side by side, not truly. In interviews, Johnny grew tight-lipped about Waylon. The hurt was still there. The silence was louder than any outburst. Because when someone who once carried your pain turns their back on your healing, that cut doesn't fade. It festers. The next wound came from Kristofferson. They wrote together, drank together, prayed together. They weren't just collaborators, they were brothers of the spirit, kindred rebels trying to find light through the music. But when Johnny's world began to crack in the 70s, when the pills blurred the days and faith faltered, Chris disappeared. Johnny didn't need a spotlight or sympathy. He needed a hand, a voice, a reminder he wasn't alone. But Chris, overwhelmed or afraid, chose distance. "You vanished when I needed a hand," Johnny once told a friend, his voice low, not angry, but hollow. That silence, in his darkest hour, felt like abandonment. And for a man already fighting ghosts, it became unforgivable. Chris tried to return. He wrote him letters soaked in regret, sent songs that reached for forgiveness. But Johnny had already built a fortress around his pain, and inside it, Chris's name had been scratched out like a prayer unanswered. When they finally met again, the hug was stiff, the handshake cold. No argument, no closure. Just two men staring across a canyon carved by time and betrayal. And Johnny walked away knowing, some friends don't leave with fury. They fade. And that kind of loss cuts deepest of all. Another target of Cash's quiet fury was David Allan Coe. The rebel of rebels, Coe was wild, unapologetic, and wrapped in controversy. He pushed boundaries Johnny refused to even approach, crossing lines of race, decency, and artistic integrity. His lyrics were laced with hate. His shows were spectacles of chaos, often designed to provoke rather than perform. Johnny didn't just disapprove, he was repulsed. Cash, a man who carried his sins like scars, couldn't stomach Coe's use of shock for attention. He saw him not as a rebel, but as a dangerous showman, one who mistook vulgarity for courage. It boiled over when Coe took aim at Johnny himself, mocking his recovery, his faith, and his past. "A preacher with a pill problem," Coe had said in a sneering interview, a quote that spread like poison through the industry. Johnny didn't respond with words. He responded with absence. Coe was banned from his tours, left off his guest lists, and erased from his personal memory. In circles of young musicians, when his name came up, Johnny offered only one sentence. "That's what the devil sounds like when he sings with a smile." To Johnny, Coe wasn't just offensive, he was a threat to everything music should be, a reflection of pain, not a performance of it. Their divide wasn't just moral, it was spiritual. Then there was Merl Haggard, perhaps the deepest scar. They were allies once, prison-born poets, survivors who sang from the edge. But while Johnny wore his darkness like armor, Merl saw it as competition. Fame came for them both, But Merl couldn't ignore how the spotlight lingered longer on Johnny. The public adored the man in black. To Merl, it felt like a betrayal of their shared grit. The rupture came quietly, but cut deeply. Merl accused Johnny of embellishing his prison image, whispered words that spread like wildfire in Nashville. It wasn't just gossip. It was a direct attack on the very soul Johnny had bared to the world. Johnny's music wasn't a brand. It was his survival. And to have that questioned by someone he once considered a brother, it turned admiration into anguish. Even as they stood side by side on stage in later years, the bond had already broken. Their harmonies were hollow, their glances distant. Fans never saw the divide, but those closest did. Johnny never retaliated publicly, but in his final journals, scribbled in shaky ink, he called Merl a man who mistook jealousy for justice, a line soaked in sorrow, not spite. In the end, Merl wasn't just a friend lost. He was a chapter closed with regret, a reminder that some wounds don't bleed, but still never heal. These weren't headline feuds. They were quiet heartbreaks, spiritual betrayals, and moments where pride collapsed into sorrow. Johnny Cash never needed to yell. His silence could destroy. Each name was a silent chord in a song that was never played. Some were wounds left open for decades. Others were scars hidden beneath layers of gospel verses and gravel-toned refrains. These were not petty rivalries. They were deep, soul-twisting reckonings with men who mirrored his darkness or mocked his light. To the public, Johnny was a legend, but behind closed doors he carried ghosts, names etched into memory not with hate, but with grief. He didn't burn bridges. He watched them collapse and then walked alone through the smoke. And in the quiet corners of his legacy, these names remain, carved in shadow, echoing through his songs like ghosts no one can see, but everyone can feel.